Welcome to the pod focusing on the aftermath and recovery from the devastating Palisades fires of January 2025. Journalist Joel Pollack, entrepreneur Oren Ezra, and technology expert Ron Goldschmidt serve up to the moment vital news and information, discuss the ongoing recovery efforts, and introduce us to the individuals and trades who are playing key roles in rebuilding our cherished communities. We're diving into the deep end and learning quickly how we can move forward together. We know the pain because we're living real-time news, stories, resources, and insights on the ongoing recovery effort. Buckle up. We're three homeless guys.
Welcome to Three Homeless Guys, the podcast about the Palisades fire and the rebuilding effort. I'm journalist Joel Pollack here with technology expert Ron Goldschmidt. Our friend Oren Ezra, entrepreneur, is out of town, and we are very pleased to be welcomed by the filmmaker who produced Hotshot. Gabriel Mann is here with us, and we'll give him a more extensive introduction later, but first, just want to welcome you to Three Homeless Guys.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's been a really interesting week. I have a pretty weak voice because I'm getting over whatever northeast bug seems to be going around. My 4-year-old was unable to keep anything down for 2 days. I didn't have that version of it. I just couldn't talk for, 3 weeks or something. And I barely made it through the last episode. So now if I lose my voice suddenly, as I'm about to do, you'll forgive me. I don't know where it's coming from. I mean, I feel fine otherwise. I went to the gym today. I'm doing great. I'm not sick, but I just can't talk. Having said that, doesn't mean I don't have opinions, just because I can't say anything. And I want to just bring in some news before we get going. First of all, it's Thanksgiving week, and we want to just wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. I have already done the stuffing and the pies. I have pumpkin pie and apple pie. I stay pretty conventional for Thanksgiving. The turkey is thawed and ready to be prepared. It's really my favorite thing. I mean, everything's going to taste like Palisades to me because I made all of this stuff every single year in our house in Pacific Palisades, and we just gave up traveling for Thanksgiving because what could be better than Thanksgiving in the Palisades? So I've just got all my recipes in our little home here in Washington, D.C., where I've relocated, of course, going back and forth now to L.A., doing the work with the California Post, which is going very well, but preparing the Thanksgiving feast. So I want to wish everybody happy Thanksgiving and also just say how grateful I am that we're all still here, because it could have been very different on January 7th. We were lucky to get out. People have not been so lucky in other fires, and just very lucky to have the neighbors that we do and the community that we do, and everybody's keeping everybody else strong. So it's just amazing. A lot of challenges lie ahead, but really just grateful for everybody here and grateful for the Three Homeless Guys. And let me just jump into some news here. This happened as we're speaking on the 25th of November. This happened yesterday on the 24th. Governor Gavin Newsome came out of hibernation on the fire issue. Now, he's been very active all over social media, and he's obviously one of the contenders for 2028 for the Democratic nomination. And he came out of hibernation, or broke his relative silence on the fire. He doesn't really like to talk about the fire very much. He doesn't come to Palisades. He doesn't really do very much, but he issued some executive orders and a bunch of press releases and social media statements, and you can read the executive order on his website, and it's got a lot of whereases, whereas. But basically what the executive order does is it makes it easier for you to get insurance if you install a solar roof in your rebuild. So if you lost your house in Pacific Palisades or Malibu, and you are struggling to rebuild your house, maybe because your insurance isn't paying out, or if it is paying out, the cost of construction is too high, you should take some comfort in knowing that Governor Gavin Newsome has changed some of the regulations by executive order to make it easier for you to get insurance if you pay the extra $10,000 to $20,000 it might cost you to install a solar roof. So that's Gavin Newsome's executive order. And he also has a few other provisions in there, but that's the main one. He's also expanded funding for fire survivors through the Cal Assist Mortgage Relief Program. It sounds great, right? Everybody needs mortgage relief. We've got the 12-month, 1-year anniversary coming up. A lot of people took forbearance on their mortgages. People are facing those big balloon payments where you still have to pay back 12 months of mortgage on the day that that comes due, which is a problem I'm working on, by the way, trying to get something done about it here in DC. But people are looking at that mortgage payment, so it would be good to have some relief, right? Well, the provision here in the governor's executive order is that you only are eligible for the mortgage relief if you have an income up to $211,050 per household. So given that the median household income in Pacific Palisades is right around that, that means half of the people in Palisades aren't eligible. And I'm guessing that the half of residents that is eligible, those of you who fall under that median threshold, well, many of you may be renters, and many of you may own your homes outright because you bought the homes when they were a lot cheaper. You might be living off a fixed income. I just don't know how anybody affords a house in the Palisades on a salary of $200,000 a year anyway. So I don't think this applies to anybody. I think it's a mortgage relief program that will have very few recipients because it just doesn't apply to anybody. Now, the rest of LA and California might say, well, you know, $211,000 sounds like a lot of money. And it is. In most of the country, it is. But in LA and in California, it just does not pay for very much housing. So my opinion about this executive order is it's basically nothing. And Gavin Newsome then went on social media and talked about how great it was that he had signed these executive orders. And he said, Donald Trump has done nothing and he's abandoned the fire survivors. In fact, the headline for the executive order on the governor's website is, while Trump turns his back on LA fire survivors, Governor Newsome issues order creating more flexibility for recovery and rebuilding. Now, I'll just say this about the Trump administration. I have been vocal about the fact that I'd like to see more administration involvement. So I think one can make the argument that the administration should be more involved. However, when you look at what the administration's done, whether it's the EPA clearing the hazardous waste, the Army Corps of Engineers finishing the debris cleanup in record time, the Small Business Administration offering loans to people, I think they've been pretty active. It's hard to say they've been absent. Maybe the president could have come back again, but he did come in January. I haven't seen Gavin Newsome very much in Pacific Palisades. Maybe he's been there. I haven't been there that much in the last few months, so maybe he's been there while I'm away. But I think this is just foolishness. I think that Gavin Newsome needs to stop the tit for tat with President Trump. And if he wants $40 billion for fire aid, which is what he's demanding, then he should work with the president. And I'm going to surprise you guys because we had a whole episode in which we discussed Zoran Mamdani and his victory in New York and what it means. I think Zoran Mamdani did something good. I think he set the example. He met with Trump in the Oval Office, and the two of them were perfectly cordial to one another. And Mamdani still thinks that Trump's a fascist, and he calls him a fascist on other shows and social media and whatever. But when he was in the Oval Office with Trump, the two of them were cordial, and they talked about affordability. And Trump said, we have the same goals. We want lower crime. We want things to be more affordable. We want economic growth. We want job creation. Mamdani agrees with all that. He didn't stand there and insult the president. So you're not required to give up who you are and what you believe in to work with the guy. So why doesn't Gavin Newsome put the social media away and just work with the president? Instead of calling him names in these press releases, work with him to get the fire aid we need and stop with the ridiculous executive orders. I mean, great. You know, if you have the money to rebuild and you got a little extra left over for a solar rooftop, congratulations, more power to you. Nobody's jealous of you. Everybody thinks that you're doing a great job. We wonder how you did it, but good job. You'll get this little insurance benefit the governor's throwing in there, but it doesn't help anybody else. So anyway, I'm off my soapbox for now, but that's the latest news. We've got Gavin Newsome basically, I think, realizing that there's been a lot of critical media attention paid now to the fact that the rebuild is not going well, and that Newsome is basically AWOL while he's spending $300 million of our taxpayer money on redistricting and going to South Carolina and Texas to make fun of Republicans. I mean, he's basically campaigning for president. But meanwhile, there's a state to run here. And there are people who are still displaced almost a year later and who don't know how they're going to afford to rebuild or to pay back their mortgages. And the insurance money's running out for alternate living expenses. So people are in a pretty bad situation and they're starting to raise their voices about it. Anyway, that's my little spiel at the beginning here. But you know, that really irritates me. And if you watch this podcast for long enough, you know that this is not some kind of partisan thing. We don't use it here to side with one party over another. But I do think that if you're going to make a big show of trying to help people who've been through this fire experience, then do things that actually matter. And you know what? As Trump said with Mamdani in the room, we put the parties aside and we work together. I don't think that should be beyond Gavin Newsome if Zoran Mamdani can do it. I mean, you're not going to be more radical than the guy who calls himself a democratic socialist. So why don't you just sit down with the president? And I'd say the same thing to the president. Sit down with Gavin Newsome and work it out. That's my spiel.
So I've been following a lot of what's been going on here, and I understand, like, you know, Gabriel actually has some news today as well, because I've been watching his X feed, and he's been very, very lively lately. And I think what he brings in is a very unique perspective here, because he understands fires very intimately. I saw the documentary, which we'll talk about a bit later, Hotshot, which is fantastic, by the way. It's very captivating. It's got everything you want amongst genres. It's a documentary. It's a cinematographer masterpiece. It's got a human interest story. It teaches you a lot about the history of fires and everything that's happened with wildfires in the past, specifically in California. And where that weaves into our story is that Gabriel has a unique eye to what's happening lately, especially with all the news with the fire department and who set the fire and you know who's responsible for it and how does the state configure. And I'd love to see his take. So, like, Gabriel, I'd just like to jump right in and ask you what happened the last couple of days and how does it impact the Palisades fire story and litigation, etc.
Well, what's really happened is the dam is broken as far as the state and Gavin Newsome are concerned. Now, I've been saying from the start, this is the state's fault. You know, it started on their property. They are responsible for this fire. For a long time, we knew that it was a rekindle. We knew from the ATF that it was a rekindle. And we knew anecdotally it was a rekindle. And they tried to live in denial for a long time. And then once the ATF finally released the report to the public, then they shifted the goalposts. Now it's like, well, we had nothing to do with it. We weren't there. We don't have any fire responsibilities on the state park. And to a certain extent, there is some truth of that. Los Angeles Fire Department is responsible for an initial attack fire in that area around the Palisades. It's what's called the Local Responsibility Area, the LRA. But it's still on state park property. What we've learned, and this I've been embargoed on this for the last few days, but it's finally out in court. There were multiple state park employees who not only were present on the Lockman fire on New Year's Eve and in the subsequent days, they also prevented the Los Angeles Fire Department and the LA County Fire Department from actually containing the fire and mopping it up properly, to the point where they were telling them to stop digging with their tools, which, you know, Wildland Firefighting 101 is, in order to contain a fire, you have to cut a physical line around the fire. You can't just spray it down. You have to have a physical line. They stopped partway through. What we learned today in court is it was a state park employee who stopped them in the middle of cutting line and told them, oh, you can't, it's like the plant police. You can't touch that plant. We can't uproot it. Well, and as we know, the rekindle occurred in the root system of these plants because they weren't allowed to do their job. So while LAFD has taken all this heat over the last month or so since it came out that it was a rekindle, you know, everyone's blaming them. They didn't mop it up. They didn't mop it up. What people didn't understand is that the state park precluded them from actually mopping it up. And at the end of the day, it's their property. Now, look, if it had rekindled later in the day, or it rekindled, you know, even the next day, then I could say, okay, maybe it's on the fire department. But it was sitting there for a week. It is absolutely unacceptable. What we found out today is that we have proof that not only was Gavin lying, but the state, which had been stonewalling all of this information until the 11th hour last night, right before the status conference hearing, when they had to submit, finally, emails, documents showing who was there, who was on staff, who was actually reporting. Well, now we know they had at least 2 resource advisors. They also, and those are the ones who are specifically telling firefighters, hey, don't cut there. You can't touch that plant. That's protected. You can't put a bulldozer there. And then they also had 3 rangers checking in on that fire over the subsequent days. So they had direct oversight over this fire. It's a part of their responsibility, and this is an undelegable responsibility. They have to secure the fire area, and they never did it. And here's the other shocking thing that came out. It's part of their state policy manual that they prefer to let fires burn. Like, they literally say, just let it burn until it hits a natural boundary. And unfortunately, because they don't maintain any fuel breaks, there is no distinction. There's no separation between the state park and the thousands of homes in the Palisades. So the only natural boundary for the Topanga State Park and any brush fire is the Pacific Ocean. And you've got the entire Pacific Palisades and half of Malibu in between. So not only do they prefer to let it burn, but they don't want you to uproot any plants, which is Wildland Firefighting 101. And if any stumps are burning, they don't want you to put it out. They want you to let it burn. So for the last month, when everybody's been asking, why in the hell did LAFD just leave? Why did they leave this smoldering fire? It's because that's what the state park wanted.
So when you say it came out in court today, what do you mean? Was that something that was introduced by the plaintiffs? They introduced that evidence? Because I saw some of this going back and forth in the media. There was a resident who took a photograph of a state park employee with the big golden bear on the back of their jacket talking to firefighters on January 1st. Then I saw the state parks respond in the media saying it's ridiculous. We would never tell people not to do this. We would never tell people not to fight a fire. They couldn't explain why somebody who appears to be a state park employee was there, but they basically had this denial in the media. What happened in court?
Well, what happened in court was Alexander Robertson, who's the lead attorney for the master case, was able to argue successfully that they need to be able to subpoena 12 Los Angeles Fire Department firefighters who were there at the Lockman fire, as well as 3 park rangers, 2 resource advisors, and several other state park employees. And what they did was they presented evidence that the state's attorney finally turned over at the 11th hour yesterday. And part of that is emails confirming that not only were state park employees aware of it, but they were identifying specifically where the fire was. So they knew exactly where it was, and it's all time-stamped, so it's the night of the fire itself. So all of this denial that they had nothing to do with it, they have no fire responsibilities, therefore, there's no reason to have discovery into the state and all of their documentation. So they've been trying to play this game where, fires, we don't deal with fires on the state parks. We have nothing to do with that. So, we shouldn't be submitting documents. Don't open discovery. Up until right now, the court has had a stay on discovery for all of the defendants. And so the attorneys have been hamstrung for months. They haven't been able to get access to the information that they need. And so they've been having to try to plead the case why the state is on the hook. I understand that for most people, it's a bit of a bank shot, right? Because you think, well, they're not firefighters. And we saw the Los Angeles Fire Department. They have the LRA. So it's hard for people to grasp why exactly the state would be culpable and why they're defendants. And to a certain degree, the legal argument is somewhat esoteric. It's based on case law from the 70s, where a bunch of fuel canisters were stacked up at a municipal airport in Imperial County. Somebody ignited a fire, those canisters blew up, and they destroyed somebody's property outside of the airport. And what the court found was that not only is the person who ignited the fire culpable, but also the people who created a dangerous condition by stacking those fuels. Well, in this case, the fuels are the protected plants that are stacked right up against all the homes in the Pacific Palisades. So I understand that's a little bit of a legal bank shot, and the attorneys had to try to compel the court to open up discovery into the state and the state records. That finally happened. So they're finally going to get to subpoena them. They're going to get to subpoena the Los Angeles Fire Department. And they did that by showing documents from emails from state park employees demonstrating that not only were they lying about not being aware of the fire, but they had responsibilities and that they were communicating with the fire department on what exactly to do tactically. It's actually in their own policy manual, and this is public knowledge. It's just, I don't know, for some reason people weren't taking it seriously, but it's in their directives to their resource advisors. You are to try to push the fire department to do minimum impact suppression tactics. And in that case, that means you can spray it with water, but you can't dig it out with a Pulaski or a McLeod. You can't do that on a wildfire. You have to dig it out. So
it's interesting. So 2 things then. Number one, they're going to be able to depose some of the firefighters who were there. I think that was expected. I think as part of this suit, I think people assumed they were going to get some kind of evidence from the firefighters there. But number 2, you say there are emails they've now discovered between these state employees that show that they were there and they were aware of the fire and the potential for spread?
That's correct. And the thing is, These public records requests have been open for months, and the state has been dodging them. To date, they had only, as of yesterday, they'd only turned over one document. It was completely redacted. The entire thing was blacked out. It was like some CIA file. Last night, essentially, was the first time that the state's attorney finally turned over some of the responsive documents as a part of that public records request, because of the stay on discovery, all of the attorneys have had is the California Public Records Request Act. That's all that they had. They finally responded with some of these documents, and it validated what everybody on this side has been saying the entire time. The state does have fire responsibilities, and they did have employees there who had oversight over that fire, and they failed.
Right, the other question is, maybe they were doing what they were supposed to do. I mean, if there's a policy that they have to discourage the fire department from digging and from threatening some of these endangered species, maybe the problem isn't negligence by individual firefighters or some kind of bad behavior by the state parks employees, but maybe it's the state policies themselves, because if they're carrying out some kind of directive that's in a manual, I mean, maybe that's the problem.
Well, that certainly is the problem, but here's where it gets even more complicated. On the Lockman fire, you had an A rep, an agency rep, or a resource advisor show up and was showing the battalion chief, who's the incident commander on the Lockman fire, was showing him a map. You cannot cut here, you cannot take a dozer here, this is where we have protected plants. So basically limiting how he could do his job. She wouldn't let him take the map. And he wasn't allowed to take a picture of the map. It was like, this your eyes only for this moment. These maps are apparently confidential. And what we believe may be happening here is these maps are, like, there's no reason for a plant map to be confidential other than if your policy is to let it burn. They didn't want the Palisades residents to know that this parcel right behind their homes is a do not touch area, let it burn area. If the residents were aware of this, I have to imagine with all the attorneys who live in the Pacific Palisades, do you think they maybe would have said, hey man, no, we're not doing that, and then petitioned the government to actually change that policy so it didn't destroy all their homes? Because of course, the Palisades, specifically the Highlands area, is like completely surrounded. The Highlands is an island in the middle of Topanga State Park. So it's like there's only so much brush clearance that the residents can do. At the end of the day, they're at the mercy of the state. But everybody's completely unaware of what's happening. And this isn't just, people not being involved. These maps are confidential. And this is in some of the emails that were finally discovered by the attorneys, in that these maps are to be kept confidential. There's a lot of really odd clandestine behavior for these people. I mean, these aren't like top secret CIA scientists. These are just people with bachelor's degrees working for the state parks. So why do they have so much secrecy? What's the purpose of that? It's honestly, it's like really opaque. And so this is why lifting that stay on discovery is so important. This is why being able to depose those employees is so important. But to your point, there's also some question of whether or not that policy is actually in effect. And this is something that I have to be a little bit opaque about, but there's a potential that policy might actually not be official policy and not in agreement with the Los Angeles Fire Department. So these are all the things that are going to have to get sorted out in court. But I will say it's really not looking good for the state.
Really fascinating. And we'll have to see what emerges. I mean, discovery can produce all kinds of things, but these private lawsuits, and we interviewed Trey Robinson a few weeks ago. I was on the BART. I'm told you can't call it the BART, so I was on BART during the interview. But he was very informative, and we'll see where that goes. Obviously, there are also the other investigations going on. You've covered some of the Senate investigation that was started by Senator Rick Scott and Senator Ron Johnson several months ago. They came to Palisades a couple of weeks ago, and you were there to document the launch of the investigation. What has that turned up? Do you hear anything about what the investigation is producing?
At this point, it hasn't been that fruitful, but they cautioned us that these things do take time. So they've issued demand letters to Karen Bass. They have also issued demand letters to California State Parks. They are reluctant to use their subpoena power, but they do have that in their back pocket. I will say what happened in court this morning certainly changes a lot of things, because it might open the floodgates that heretofore were completely closed off. Like I said, the only document that they ever submitted was just completely blacked out. So it sort of felt like up until this point, we were coming up against a brick wall. We're going against the CIA, you know? All of a sudden, it does feel like the dam is sort of broken on this. And so to a certain degree, the Senate investigation may take a little bit of a backseat. However, there is another portion of the congressional investigation, and that is looking into several things pertaining to funding. This is where it's going to get really bad. Now, I've suspected for a long time, forget the fire aid thing. We already know that there is some weird tomfoolery going on with that thing, and I do believe that they're going to find some stuff. They have forensic auditors from the IRS looking into this, and I do believe they've already found things. But when it comes to all the funding for, say, prescribed burning, right? There's a lot of federal funding that goes into fuels management in California, but what we know is it's not getting done, right? And especially if you were to take the typical cost of doing prescribed fire on 1 acre, California is the most expensive place in the world to do prescribed fire because it's California. It's about $1,000 per acre is like the upper end of that. When you look at the amount of money, the billions of dollars of both state and federal funds that are going into it, and when you look at the total prescribed fire that they're actually doing, which is around 30,000 acres per year, which is, I mean, it's anemic, doesn't even begin to describe it. Florida proactively burns 2 million acres a year, right? And that's what it takes to have a resilient landscape. The normal burn rate in California is about 4.5 million acres a year. That's like the baseline. So that's how much prescribed fire the state needs to be doing. They're only doing 30,000 acres. They're getting enough funding to do 1 million acres a year, but they're not doing it. So the question is, where's that money going? And this is the big question that I don't think enough people are paying attention to. You always hear Gavin when he's going around on these podcasts, his favorite thing is we 10x'd. He's always saying how he 10x'd, the fire mitigation budget, and yet they're not actually doing it. And he does this other little sleight of hand where he never says that they burned 200,000 acres. He always says they treated 200,000 acres, because the word treated encompasses multiple practices that also includes prescribed fire, but aren't prescribed fire. And so it gives him this pass where he can make it sound like he's doing 200,000, 500,000 acres of prescribed fire when he's really not. Here's the other problem. California, over the last few years, they got busted for overcounting their acreages. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you were to burn a 100-acre plot of prescribed fire. They would count every single process on that 100-acre plot as 100 acres of treatment. So let's say they plant it. That's 100 acres. Then they go and scout the site. That's another 100 acres. Then they take a dozer and cut out their box. That's 300 acres now. So before they've even put fire on the ground, they've already counted 300, 400, 500 acres. Then they burn it. That's another 100 acres. Then they go and supervise it. That's another 100 acres. So they've been inflating their numbers. We don't actually know how much is getting done. But when you look at the results, when you look at all of these destructive fires, you have to figure, are they doing any of it? I mean, when you look around during the fire off season, do you see smoke in the sky? So this is what the Senate's going to be looking into, is where are all these federal dollars going? Because they have to have accountability for that. Both the Palisades fire and the Eaton fire were paid for 100% by the federal government through FMAGs. These are fire management assistant grants from FEMA. So whenever, like to your point earlier, Gavin's always complaining about the feds aren't doing anything. Well, they paid 100% of the top of these fires. What are they getting out of it? They also paid for all the cleanup. Like, where is the response to all this? The other side of this is there's going to be HUD involvement here with the housing and urban development. What we're seeing is we're seeing foreign investors snatching up properties throughout Malibu in particular, like on the oceanfront, and throughout the Palisades. The same thing is happening to Altadena. At what point does someone step in and intervene? Because we've now set a precedent where any bad actor can just take a couple of road flares on a windy day behind Laguna or Bel Air and burn down the entire place. And they know that the state and local government are going to make it so painful for the residents, they're going to lose at least 50% of the population through attrition, and then they'll be able to snatch up that property, pennies on the dollar. You get to invade the country and take over these areas without ever firing a shot. So these are the kinds of things that I know the Senate is definitely going to be turning their attention to, how it pertains to what's happening with all these federal dollars, because that's really what they have oversight over.
I'm going to let Ron jump in here in a second, but I want to ask you something about Hotshot, the movie. So when this fire happened in Pacific Palisades, and of course the Eaton fire, I was told by a neighbor of mine, there's this movie you got to see. It's called Hotshot. And so I heard about the movie and about you before I met you at all, before I knew you were going to be following this fire very closely. And this neighbor of mine said, Hotshot basically makes the case that there's a pecuniary interest going on in some of these wildfires. Is that accurate? I haven't seen the movie yet, I must admit. I have not watched it. I will watch it. And it looks incredible. But what's your overall theory about why we're seeing so many wildfires lately?
Well, the number one reason we're seeing so many wildfires is because of too much fire suppression. By eliminating fire from the landscape, this is nature's cleaning crew, right? So the forest land in California is meant to burn. It requires fire. And when you have too much overgrowth, it's just like stacking up gasoline at the airport, right? So if you just allow this stuff to continue to grow, it's gonna burn eventually. So if it keeps growing and growing and growing because you keep putting the fires out before it clears out that old brush, then you're gonna get this explosive mega fire. And we see that over and over. So that's the primary reason. So now, why do we not fix that? Well, there's a huge financial engine behind what I call the wildfire industrial complex. And it's very similar to the military industrial complex. It sort of feeds itself. And sometimes it's not necessarily about Mr. Burns in a smoky room plotting to burn down an area, but you have to think about who's actually financially hurt by this fire. Obviously, you guys are hurt, right? The residents are hurt. And we're talking about maybe 10,000 people. Do you know how many more people financially benefit from this fire? You think about all of the things that have to be rebought. You think about the linemen, the construction workers. You've got people like contractors coming in from Houston, Texas, where they're normally building for $200 a square foot. They're coming out and camping their RVs in Southern California. They're building at $1,500 a square foot. It is a gold rush for a lot of people. And unfortunately, this is the sad reality of every fire. It's a tragedy for some, and it's a gold rush for a lot of other people. So it's not necessarily that there's some grand design. I hate conspiracy theories. People aren't plotting to burn all these places down so they can make a fortune. It just begs the question, well, who's disincentivized to ever actually do the right thing and get rid of the brush and prevent these things from happening? Because that is, the accumulation of fuels is the primary reason you're seeing these fires. It's not climate change. Nothing's unprecedented. We've got pictures of fires rolling through the Palisades going back to the 50s and the 30s. This happens in a regular interval. And when you get enough brush over 30, 40 years that's never been touched by fire, it explodes. So it's not climate change. At the end of the day, the question becomes, who's disincentivized? Unfortunately, it's the victims who get hurt. And at a certain point, they lose all of the political capital. I've found that with California wildfires, you get about 2 weeks of sympathy, you get 2 weeks of political capital, and then that attention and that sympathy falls off precipitously, and they're totally forgotten. I mean, just across the way from you guys, where I grew up in Malibu Lake, there's still homes, like dozens of homes that burned in the Woolsey fire in 2018 that are still just empty, barren lots. It looks like the alphabet streets. So these people just fall through the cracks. Paradise is still 75% just rubble. So the question becomes, how do we disrupt that cycle? Well, I think the Palisades fire is very unique in that this is the first time I've ever seen attention stay on a devastating fire like this for more than 2 weeks, let alone 10 months. And it seems like the interest is actually, it's only increasing in intensity. It's almost become like a drama in a way. And it's very exciting to me because for the first time, we have a chance in California to disrupt this cycle, this permanent cycle of wildfire and devastating loss. But to your point of the financial interest behind it, there's not a strong enough disincentive to stop these things from happening. There's nobody who's getting rich off of clearing brush. And ultimately, a successful, brush clearance or fuels mitigation, it's measured in something that didn't happen. It's a counterfactual. So it's very hard to wrap our minds around something and really invest in the mitigation portion. Whereas when that fire is barreling down the hill, you'll throw billions of dollars into whatever it takes to stop that fire. So there's some very complex dynamics there, but ultimately there is a huge industry for this stuff. And all the vehicles, all the new solar panels, all the homes that are getting rebuilt, it's going to really impact the bottom line of a lot of people in a very positive way. And so there's a strong incentive for this stuff to never get fixed.
You know, in the documentary, Gabriel, I find that you come out of it being like almost like a PhD in fire prevention. I came in thinking I know something about wildfire, realized I don't know anything. You delve really into the history of how people fought fires in the past, like the statistics, which I love, of like what's happened in the past versus what's happening now, and concepts like fire debt, fire ladder, like just things that I just didn't know existed, and I found fascinating. But one of the things that I really want to touch on is like you talk about this. It's almost like fit with the news cycle, which is almost our attention is somewhere where it shouldn't be. Everybody focuses on like the ignition part, or like who set the fire, or like the weather, which is always going to stay constant. Whereas really what we should be going to is like what the fuel was for the fire. And I'd like in the Palisades fire, like that's something that nobody's talked to until now in these court cases, because that's what really caused the fire.
That is such an astute point, by the way. When it comes to wildfire, you have a triangle. It's the wildfire triangle. So you've got three things that you need in order to have a wildfire, and you need all three, right? So it's not about, the goal isn't to reduce each one a little bit. You just need to get rid of one. So you have drought, fuels, and ignition. Now, of those three things, the ignitions, look, to a certain degree, we can try to minimize those, but at the end of the day, bad stuff happens. People will flick their cigarette, and even if we stopped all human ignitions, we'll still have lightning like we did in 2020. That massive fire season was mostly lightning. Can't control the weather, right? That's the drought portion. The one thing that we can control are the fuels. And to your point, it always feels like we're focusing on the two things that we can't control and ignoring the one thing that we can control. And so this is why I always get frustrated with the climate change debate, because look, of course the climate's changing and it's got some impact. I don't know how significant it is. It's just not relevant. So I don't care because we can't change it. There's no amount of solar panels or Teslas that we could ever buy that's going to make the weather less angry. And at the end of the day, we can't stop all the ignitions. So why even focus on that? Focus on the one thing you can control, and that's getting rid of fuels. That's something that state has not done since the last time it burned in the 70s, when the Mandeville fire came through and burned up a bunch of homes in the Palisades. So when it comes to dealing with this stuff, at the end of the day, I'm all about focusing on the thing that can have a maximal impact. Now, in terms of people not talking about it, I've been warning about the Palisades for years, in particularly because I've been to two Palisades fires in 2019 and 2021. Now, the one in 2019, which was relatively small, but it was kind of scary. It was started by a cigarette and ran up the hill. But the 2021 Palisades fire was very scary for a couple reasons. It didn't hurt anybody, right? It just burned into Topanga State Park. It burned the opposite direction of this Palisades fire, but it burned in the preseason. It burned in May. It shouldn't have been burning. The other thing is it was 85% humidity and like 50-degree weather. It should not be burning 1,200 acres in May with those conditions, but it did. And the reason why it did that is because the fuels are so bad. They're so overgrown. They're so dead and desiccated on Topanga State Park that it didn't even matter what the climatological conditions were. That fuel is so bad that it overrides the weather. It didn't even care what the weather was doing. This is the part that people really don't understand. And I remember being on that fire and driving up into the foothills around Topanga and seeing just what a rat's nest it was. I'm like, oh man, this is going to be really bad. And I've been warning people about the Palisades since 2021, and it seemed like no one really cares. I feel like, to your point, this is the first time that we're actually getting some people discussing the fuels. It feels like the whole climate change debate is over, right? Like Bill Gates doesn't care about climate change anymore. I know Gavin's trying to tie solar panels to that mortgage assistance. And just keep in mind that all the solar panels and all the Teslas and all that stuff that burned up introduced all of this like lead and cadmium and beryllium that's creating a Superfund site out of the Palisades. And people are dealing with all kinds of nasty cancers because of all that stuff. And it all burned up anyway because instead of getting out a chainsaw, which are now banned in California, and clearing their brush, they're getting solar panels and Teslas and thinking that they're feeding the meter because they've been told for years, well, it's climate change. It's climate change that's driving it. You read any article about a wildfire, it's like, due to human-caused climate change. We're finally getting past that. Now, you can stop tomorrow's fire today just by clearing brush. You can't do that with anything else.
Amazing. I just have, just shifting gears a little bit, and I've watched your X Spaces, which is great. I recommend everybody to watch it. It had like some amazing information. What's your feeling about the media coverage so far about the fires? You've been critical of the LA Times. Can you just I'm just trying to understand, from your point of view, you're now living in Tennessee or California, you know the fire landscape in California very, very well. How do you feel like the media has covered this, and where do you think this is going from a media perspective?
Atrociously. The media coverage has been atrocious. Like I said, they've betrayed the readership in Southern California and all over fire country by convincing everybody that it's because of angry weather. And it's such a disempowering narrative to blame everything on climate change, because instead of taking proactive steps that could have saved your home, they're stuck, just buying Teslas and solar panels and all this stuff that isn't going to help. And, it breaks my heart to see. This is part of the reason why I had to leave California, because you see this permanent pattern just repeating itself over and over and over. And it seems like I'm just this tiny voice. I'm trying to shout from the rooftops that hey guys, there's a simple fix for this. And then I watch the LA Times betray their readers every single day. And the coverage of the Palisades fire has been atrocious. When Spencer Pratt was speaking out and saying hey, we don't want high rises in the Palisades, they called him a conspiracy theorist. And like anybody else who speaks out, you get a hit piece from the LA Times. And the head of state of California is calling Spencer a C-list reality star when all he's trying to do is stick up for his neighbors. It's shameful that the LA Times prints this stuff. Here's the one little bit of hope that I have. There's a guy who's new at the LA Times called Noah Haggerty. And he's finally starting to get a little bit more of an outsized role there. He is a very responsible fire journalist. He understands wildfire. He's spent a lot of time around it. Unfortunately, the typical people in the media who write about wildfires, they're like people from St. Louis, and they have a bachelor's degree in climate science or something like that, something totally unrelated to wildfire. They've never been on a fire. They've never spoken with wildland firefighters out in the cut. They never actually took the time to live it and breathe it and understand it and pay attention to it. And unfortunately, they just have to wrap everything in the climate change bubble, and then it betrays the readership. And so they never learn anything. Now, if you want a sense of how I feel about the media, there's a scene in my film where I refer to them as fire pornographers, because that's effectively all they really care about, is making pornography about the destruction. So they make a ton of money off of it. And this is a part of the wildfire industrial complex. The news makes a ton of money off the destruction, so they actually have no interest in seeing it end, which means they have no incentive in sharing how could we stop this in the future. They love it when there's fires. I remember being on the Woolsey fire in Malibu, and some media guys showed up, and there was this old restaurant that my family and I used to go to on PCH, and it was burning to the ground. And these guys showed up with their cameras, and they were just like, burn, baby, burn. They were cheering it on. And I've seen this a lot. I remember an ABC News guy coming up to me on the Bobcat fire. He's like, hey, do you know where the houses are burning? And when I told him that the Hotshots had actually stopped the fire in the drainage before the community and they saved all the homes, he's like, fudge. But he didn't say fudge. And he's like, I guess I'll go home now. He was really sad that a bunch of people didn't have their lives destroyed. So, whenever I see the coverage of the Palisades fire, I know these people too well. They're not sad. They're not upset that you guys lost your homes. They might do their little crocodile tears. They might feign some kind of compassion for you guys who've lost everything, but they love it. They love the destruction. They want to see more of it. These people are soulless goblins. And anyone who's worked in media knows what I'm talking about. I didn't used to think this, but I spent 6 years filming Hotshot. And so I was next to these people on a lot of fires. I couldn't wait to get up in the cut and go find the Hotshots because these people just gross me out.
I just have one more question about the LA Times. I understand that you also broke some of the stories, and you probably didn't get credit for it because I haven't seen your name in the news being cited.
Yeah, the smoking gun proof that the Los Angeles Fire Department left the Lockman fire still smoldering. I posted a video of that where you can see it, that it's still visibly smoldering. All this talk about it's burning underground, or, they didn't use their IR detectors. You didn't need it. You can, a layman can look at that and see that it's still smoldering. All the hoses were gone. I posted that video, and then the LA Times and, a bunch of other media outlets reached out to me immediately. And they asked for the video. I gave it to them. I also gave them the source of that video, their contact information. And yeah, and then the LA Times ran that piece the next day. And of course, they didn't give me credit. I don't care about the credit, to be perfectly honest, because look, I just want to see justice. That's all that I want. My aunt's place got burned to the ground. My cousin's places, they got burned to the ground. We had a lot of loss in our family, and it's time for justice. But yeah, they've been taking my scoops and just running with them. And look, as long as it moves the football, I don't care. I'm happy to see that they're actually reporting on this stuff. And it's not just me. And I'm happy to give these scoops up because I only have 10,000 followers on my Twitter. So, if I can get it in front of more eyeballs, I don't care about the credit. I just want that information in front of their massive audience. So like I said, it's improving a little bit at the LA Times, but there's still an uphill battle. But I'm just grateful that they're running with the information that I'm posting. I honestly, I could care less about the credit. I just want you guys to be made whole, because to me, this fire should have never happened. This is absolutely criminal, and it needs to be fixed.
You mentioned Noah Haggerty at the LA Times. His story today is from San Diego, and there's a court ruling down there in Superior Court that ordered the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, CAL FIRE, to change the way it deals with fires. Now, what they're saying is that when CAL FIRE tries to reduce wildfires and goes in and cuts these borders, which you've talked about, the problem is that in the ecosystems that are native to Southern California, the plants that grow back are non-native invasive species that are more flammable. So what they're saying is, hey, you got to take a look at this fire break plan and don't clear out the native plants. You have to try to keep some of the indigenous species there because they are less flammable. They're more used to resisting fire. What would you say to that? I mean, because everyone's arguing over whether the fire department should have cut a perimeter around the Lockman fire on January 1st so it didn't become the Palisades fire January 7th. But what the court's saying here is that actually if you cut that perimeter, you're making it more flammable, not less.
To that, I would say the court shouldn't be making these decisions. and there's a reason for that. In my film, I documented what I would consider the most perfect analog, maybe not necessarily for the Palisades, but similar. The Silverado fire in 2020. So that ran into Irvine and specifically Orchard Hills. And that had legitimate 75 to 85 mile per hour winds behind it. And this was in October. It was like the peak of the fire season. But around that community, they had about a 200, 300 foot fire break. And they didn't just cut a dozer line around the community. They planted succulents. They planted stuff that isn't going to burn and carry fire across the landscape. And they disrupted that very flammable native vegetation. That's the thing that they're not pointing out. The native vegetation, like the chaparral mix, the coastal sage, all of the scrub oak and the manzanita, that stuff is highly, highly flammable. So this idea that, if we just leave the native stuff, guys, the nickname that the Spanish explorers and the Portuguese explorers gave to Southern California was the Bay of Many Smokes, because it was always on fire. Okay, this is just endemic to California. But on the Silverado fire in 2020, when the fire ran into that fuel break, it stopped. And the firefighters didn't even have to get out their hoses. There were a couple of embers that landed in some palm trees because palm trees are fire magnets. And so, yeah, you got to deal with that. But the thing about cutting a fuel break is that it converts your flaming front, which you can't do anything to stop, right? There's no amount of water that can put it out. But it converts that flaming front into a spot fire. Right? It's not going to always stop it dead, but you're going to get little spots here and there, and those you can manage. So I just always point to that fire because the conditions on that fire were twice as bad as what you guys saw in the Palisades. You did not have 75 mile per hour winds on the Palisades fire. There's a lie. Gavin is constantly lying, saying there were 100 mile per hour winds. This was a manageable fire. It didn't have to be like this. Altadena was different. They had 70 mile an hour winds. But I'm telling you, if you cut fuel breaks and you replace it with stuff that isn't going to burn, you're not going to have the same kinds of fires. It's just the reality. I've seen it too many times that you can't. I'm sorry, no court is going to be able to tell me that cutting fuel breaks suddenly doesn't work. This is such myopia. I don't like the courts making these decisions because they have no idea what they're talking about. Ultimately, it takes maintenance. You can't just do it one time. You have to do it every single year. It's just like maintaining your garden. If you allow too many weeds to grow, they're going to be, sucking up too many resources, and all the stuff that you don't want to die is going to die. The same thing happens out there in the state parks and the national forests. You got to clear out this stuff.
As this unfolds, I have a feeling, and it keeps getting stronger every day. It's like you said, that the story is only going to get more interesting and more sorted, and we're just in the first act of this play that is going to be what happened and who's responsible and all of that. So thank you for all the work that you're doing, and please keep on doing it, because I feel like you're going to play in a very integral part in the story. Just your expertise in this is, I think, like very unique to what's happening. So I think you were placed here for a reason, to keep on doing what you're doing.
That's very kind of you. Unfortunately, everyone's had to have a crash course in Wildfire in the worst way possible. And so my goal is, if I can help people in the neighborhood that we grew up in, like every Passover, every Thanksgiving, every Christmas morning, we spent at Sunset and PCH at my grandmother's house growing up. So the Palisades is a very special place to me. And for this to happen, it's beyond criminal. So I'm not going to let it go. And if I can help people understand how to prevent this in the future and why the state does need to pay the victims, I'm happy to do it. I am a happy warrior, and I'm not going to stop.
Can you tell us what you're working on right now, and like where can we find you? Social handles, you're doing a lot of stuff, but tell our listeners where they can get you at.
So on Twitter, I am Hotshot_movie. So it's the Twitter account for my film, but I put a lot of these breaking news stories, a lot of the evidence that I have. I comb through all of the pages of the lawsuits whenever there's any kind of court proceeding. I also do live streams occasionally. And currently, Spencer Pratt and I are working on a couple of projects. I went with Spencer to DC. I've been interfacing with him basically on a daily basis. So, you're going to see a lot of documentaries come out around the Palisades fire, but a lot of them are going to be about climate. It's going to be kind of the traditional stuff. It's going to be safe. That's not what we're doing. And the reality is, to your point, this is only getting started. So anyone who's trying to write the story about the Palisades fire right now is missing about 75% of what's going to happen with all of this. Fortunately, I do believe the dam is breaking, and I'm going to be there to report on it. Hotshot_movie, and you can see the film itself on Amazon, Apple, or you can go to our website. It's hotshotmovie.com.
Before we let you go, you've mentioned Spencer Pratt a couple of times, and he has really been a one-man detective agency when it comes to this fire. He's getting all kinds of input from different sources. He's really moved from celebrity to journalist, and you have been there to document some of what he's been doing. Can you tell us a little bit about that collaboration and what it's going to produce?
Well, Spencer and I, we talk every day. And I'll usually wake up. I mean, he's texting me till 1 or 2 in the morning, and then I'll wake up with a whole bunch of texts at 5 in the morning. Spencer is very unique, and I'm so impressed with him, and I'm so proud of him. Now, I did a live stream on the lawsuit when it was first filed, and that's how Spencer found me. He saw my live stream because I was the first person to detail all of the sordid details in this fire and all the terrible things that went wrong and how the state was culpable. And so that's how I connected with him initially. So, I've helped give him a crash course in understanding wildfire, and I've been helping him vet all of the sources that are, bombarding him with information to say, no, that's not true. That's not how this works. And helping him to communicate with firefighters so he can speak their language, because he truly has become an investigative journalist. He's doing more journalisming than anyone at the LA Times at this point. And it's incredible because he's had scoops. Like, he had the first whistleblower from the Los Angeles Fire Department. And he published this on Twitter, this conversation where he revealed, yeah, man, that thing wasn't mopped up properly and we didn't feel good. I told the battalion chief we shouldn't leave, and they told us to leave anyway. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that the LA Times took that scoop, and then they got all the praise for it. So at the end of the day, Spencer really is doing investigative journalism. I know people don't necessarily want to take him seriously, but I can tell you, he is a pit bull. He's never going to stop. He's absolutely never going to stop. And he's been doing amazing work. And the amount of whistleblowers that he has sort of in his bullpen behind the scenes, you guys are going to learn so much. There's a lot that has been communicated to Senator Scott and the investigation in DC that's embargoed, that we can't necessarily talk about yet because, there's a sequence to how these things need to play out. But Spencer has done tremendous work. I'm very proud of him. And we're going to be working on a documentary on this front. But look, at the end of the day, even if we don't get a documentary done, getting this ball across the finish line and getting restitution for the victims is legitimately the only thing he cares about. He cares about nothing else. And so he's not going to stop until that happens. And today, I think, was a big day. I think today was the first day that the lawyers really felt positive that the state is going to have to come to the table.
Is he part of that lawsuit?
Oh, yeah. He's one of the 10,000 plaintiffs.
All right. So where does this go for you? I mean, are you going to be doing a documentary about the fire? I meet people all the time, by the way, who are planning books about the fire. It seems to be sort of a popular thing to do. I think it's going to be good. I think we'll have a lot of good books about the fire, a lot of good material, some evidence in each of these things. But what is your goal? I mean, are you looking at a policy change or an artistic product, general awareness? What motivates you and what's going to come out of your work on this project?
I would say a stubborn sense of a need for justice. I don't care what comes out of it, to be perfectly honest. And, I'm always asking my wife, I'm like, I don't know why I do this. I don't live there anymore. Why do I care about all of this stuff? I honestly don't know, other than it just feels criminal. And was it the Cassandra myth of this woman who's cursed with the ability to see the future? And the curse is that nobody listens to them. Nobody takes it seriously. I sort of feel that in a lot of ways, in that I called this for years and I feel like nobody listens. And it's so saddening for me to watch so many people get hurt who, like, this is not their responsibility to figure out how to stop wildfires. That's what motivates me. I don't care if we do a documentary. I'm going to do it. As long as Spencer wants to do it, I think he really is the main character when it comes to this whole saga, in that he's managed to keep this alive in the media. He has just singularly brought more attention to this. This is why I'm so happy to work with him, because, again, any message that I have just kind of gets lost in the ether. But when Spencer is saying it, he has a way of saying it, communicating it to his audience where people take it seriously and it really takes off. So I think Spencer's story is important to tell. I think I'm uniquely positioned to do it. I did not want to ever do another fire documentary, but you know what? This happened and I'm involved and I'm not going to stop now. So at the end of the day, we are going to have a piece of art and it's going to be raw and honest the same way Hotshot was. We're not going to pull any punches, and it might be a little bit tough for some people to watch, but that's the reality.
The filmmaker is Gabriel Mann. The movie is hotshotmovie.com, and I'm going to go watch it. You can stream it on Amazon Prime, Apple, Vudu, and Google Play. And just give us your social media accounts again where we can follow what you're doing.
Go to hotshot_movie on Twix, Twitter, and TEAMSIQFUTI, Team Sick Footy on Instagram, but all the real action's on Twitter.
Fabulous. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and I hope everybody has a happy Thanksgiving. It's been a tough year, but we have a lot to be thankful for, and hopefully the challenge of keeping the positive momentum going will be one that we can continue to meet here and elsewhere. If you want to subscribe, please do. Follow us on YouTube and recommend us to friends. We're 3 Homeless Guys at 3homelessguys.com. You can email us suggestions, commentary, feedback, pod@3homelessguys.com. Until next time, for Oren, for Ron, and for myself, Joel, stay strong.
Thanks for listening to 3 Homeless Guys. If this episode hit home, please subscribe to our channel. Check out 3homelessguys.com for RSS feeds to your favorite streaming service. Follow us on social and share this with a friend who needs to hear it. Drop us a review or shoot us a message at pod@3homelessguys.com. We'd love to hear from you. Stay strong, and we'll catch you next time.